We'd seen a blockchain go from $52 billion to zero, and not recover, right? Terra is gone at this point. This is somewhat similar to Ethereum's $80 ETH moment.
Hello and welcome back to Coin Bureau Clips. My name is Jessica and we have been seeing a lot of comments requesting our next interview guest and topic to come up. We are now going to be speaking to Austin Federa, who is the head of strategy at Solana. We're going to be picking his brains on the annual Breakpoint conference, some of Solana's strategy moving into 2024, and also some of his career highlights along the way. So make sure to stick around to find out what he has to say. Austin, great to have you on the line. How are you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me on. I'm over my jet lag from 2 weeks in Amsterdam and back in New York, so it's good.
You're looking very fresh post Solana's annual Breakpoint conference. So first of all, thank you for taking the time out of what I can imagine to be a very busy schedule for the call. And I think for a lot of our viewers, it is just really great to hear a little bit about you, your context and your background, some of the roadmaps from Solana this year, and also from Breakpoint, what you saw and what we can expect for 2024 and moving onwards. So I think what would be great is just to start with a little bit of an overview on your background from joining Solana back in 2021 and your journey into crypto.
Yeah, sounds good. I joined the Solana ecosystem in January of 2021, where I took a job at Solana Labs. This was right after Bison Trails, where I was with previously. It had been acquired by Coinbase. And Coinbase is awesome, but it just felt like it wasn't really the right spot for me to go after this. You go back in time to sort of like that end of 2020, and there were all these like layer 2s and layer 1s launching, and it really was an exciting time to look at like what could the future of blockchain technology really look like. And there's this one weird network off to the side called Solana, which wasn't doing sharding. It wasn't building a layer 2 on Ethereum. It was building a super fast layer 1 blockchain. And I was like, oh yeah, that one looks interesting. It's kind of funny because it wasn't even on my roadmap initially in terms of like places to join, but I was really taken with Anatoly's vision for how one global state machine could support hundreds of thousands of transactions per second. And that's kind of the place we're at today with the future of the Solana network. So it's been a wild 3 years, but it's really awesome to sort of see all the hard work that's gone in over the last 3 years to build the network into what it is today.
And when you say it like that, 3 years, I mean, the achievements that have been carried out in those 3 years have been pretty impressive. And I think a good milestone to look back at is the Solana's annual Breakpoint conference, because I can imagine 2021, that must have been a euphoric year in summary.
Yeah, 2021 was really special for a lot of reasons, but one of the main ones was the network mainnet launched in March of 2020. And if you remember March of 2020, it wasn't a great time, right? The world was going into lockdown, COVID was in full force. And so the network really had been built in that, intervening 18 months by folks on the internet, right? Developers who had never met each other, a lot of them never met on camera before even, who were all building applications. And because Solana is built on these ideas of program reusability and global composability, they were building with each other's software and with each other's programs, but they hadn't actually met in person. So, in November of 21, we got 2,000 people to come to Lisbon for the first real Solana conference. And it was crazy to see everyone actually show up and meet each other in person. There were a lot of VCs there. There were a lot of just tourists there who were, they bought Solana early and they were so excited about the price and all that sort of thing. And, the vibes in 2021 were high, and it was almost kind of one big party, right? I think the CoinDesk headline was something along the lines of Solana throws 3-day party for itself. But there were a lot of really good conversations that took place at Breakpoint, and that's kind of the core of the conference, back then and continues to be now, which is the conversations that are hard, right? This is not your typical crypto conference where it's the same, 6 folks getting asked the same 6 questions by the same 6 VCs that are all softballs, and it's really just about narrative enforcement. This is really a conference that's meant to be for builders and for people who want to think critically about what the future of blockchain technology looks like. And so, this year, I think we had the strongest collection of folks at Breakpoint we've ever had. We had about 3,000 people come to Amsterdam. We had 4 days of programming across 3 stages, and just an incredible like fervor of builders getting like and just showing what they've actually built that's now consumer facing and consumer ready applications on the Solana network.
And I think you've said it very well there that for a lot of people, I mean, they live and breathe crypto. And when you are dedicated into building within an ecosystem, you are really living and breathing in it. So I can imagine some of the conversations must be quite passionate, maybe sometimes quite heated, because a lot of people are very set on determining to make Solana or other networks be the best they could be. What were some of the standout conversations that you heard this year at Breakpoint?
So some of the ones that were really exciting is the launch of FireDancer on testnet and sort of all of the additional work that's gone into that. This is the first time a second validator client has been built for a network besides Ethereum that's built on a totally independent code base. And so this is a rewrite of the Solana validator client in C. It's quite performant. In early benchmarks, it's anywhere between 10 to 100 times faster than the current version of the network. And it is live on testnet, and folks are installing it and testing it. And, who knows, maybe it's 9 months, maybe it's 12 months, maybe it's 16 months before all the bugs are found and it actually is ready for mainnet. But it's a really cool milestone to see. There's sort of this thing at Breakpoint this year where everything was either a very low level technical talk on network architecture optimization, things like FireDancer, talks by the jump trading engineers on like Kevin Bauer's talks are always fascinating, right? But it's like very low level, like here's how we've optimized how instruction sets move through a CPU because Solana demands this level of time exacted performance out of the network. And then at the same time, it's applications like Sling and Helium that are launching, applications that if you didn't know, you wouldn't actually know they were built on blockchain. They feel just like any other consumer Web 2 application for moving money around the world, for cell phone service, all these sorts of things that are like theoretically they've been possible on blockchain since the start, but now they're actually practically usable. And that was one of the coolest things for me to see this year because I'm closer to those sort of deep technology improvements and innovations than I am the pure consumer-focused applications. They're live, they're here, they feel just like any other application, and that's I think a real big growing up point for the whole blockchain industry is when people can use an application and not have to know where it's based.
And I think it's the biggest elevator pitch as well, is when you could explain in a single sentence what something does without having to use the word crypto.
Yeah.
And that's really what we're going to need to see for the next wave. So there's been some really big headlines that have come out this year. In my opinion, we've seen kind of like the Shopify e-commerce partners, Visa integrations with Solana. Obviously, as you've mentioned, FireDancer as a scaling solution. What for you has been the one that you're like, okay, if I had to say like this one is the one that's going to kind of carry through to next year as being the most lucrative for Solana's adoption, are you able to identify which one that would be?
Well, lucrative is a little bit of a hard term, but I'll say in terms of overall impact, there's two things that have happened from opposite directions, but it's the same real core to it, which is that folks are taking the Solana virtual machine, the underlying code base of the Solana network, very seriously. Whether that's Visa saying we're going to scale our USDC settlement program that they started on Ethereum with Solana because the network is parallel, the network is fast, the network is cheap. It's all the things that Visa needs from a high-performant payment network. To Rune, who's the co-founder of Maker, saying that the Solana architecture is the architecture he's recommending for the future of MakerDAO. And that's not to say Maker is going to stop becoming not stop being an Ethereum project, right? But them saying, like, we looked around at all the architectures and we thought building something on Solana was actually a much better choice than building an L2 for our needs is a real strong endorsement of this technology stack. And so, that's sort of the two most polar opposite groups you could have: a highly regulated payment company that's been around since the 80s and the founder of the world's most successful DeFi protocol. And they're both saying that like Solana architecture has a real strong place in the future of blockchain technology.
It's got to be a pretty versatile role that you play then as head of strategy to navigate. You've mentioned the kind of the very centralized side of things. And then obviously you've got the complete other end of the spectrum with the DeFi side, speaking to people like Rune and kind of having those conversations. If we go to the centralized side of things, How has that been, those conversations? Has there been challenges with coming to these normie, let's say, organizations and entities and saying, this is what we do, this is why you need us? And how do those conversations look like?
Yeah, so I think there's a few different components with the centralized organizations, right? A lot of funds are now exploring tokenization of, things that are just objectively securities. And so they're looking for tools and frameworks where you can actually tokenize securities on chain and allow people in markets that they don't normally have access to get access to these sorts of things through KYC and other sorts of restrictions. Up to now, a lot of those initiatives have been private blockchains, or they've been in a layer two specific to one type of application. But the power of Solana means that like folks at centralized funds can actually build something like a money market account, and they can actually tokenize that, and they can deploy it on Solana right alongside permissionless DeFi. And these things can actually coexist, and that's one of the real powers of a network like Solana. This is counterintuitive, though, right? A lot of the people who work in these like large Web two and financial institutions, they came from the Ethereum world. They came from an EVM programming background, and so they're having to learn like, oh, how is Solana different? How what can we do on Solana that we couldn't actually do on other architectures? And those conversations are fascinating and fun. And there's always a moment where you're talking with a bunch of folks, and there's like one or two engineers in a room with a lot of other people who are in the business side, and you start talking about things that are possible in Solana, and they're usually zoned out a little bit when it comes to the business conversation, but they're like, oh, we can build a lot using this. And you can see them sit up in their chair and lean in and sort of be like, oh, now this is like something I can really understand the promise and power of. And so that's been one of the really cool places to see that. I think stablecoins on Solana are like the most obvious one when you can just, talk to someone like the groups at Shopify and be like, yeah, you can actually have crypto payments settle as fast as a credit card and as fast as PayPal. And that's an experience that they're not used to from blockchain. They're used to you wait 5 minutes for confirmation times on, blockchains. And so when people learn what's possible to do on Solana, it opens up a lot of possibilities for, how these big Web 2 and even, pre-Web 2 companies want to start looking at engaging with blockchain.
And you'll never guess who is in the car.
And welcome back to GM Crypto. Now we have so much fun and exciting stuff coming up for you on today's show. But first, we need to talk about the CoinBureau deals page, Guy.
That's right, Jessica, because it really is the place to find the very best deals in crypto.
For starters, you can find bonuses of up to $40,000 at some of the best crypto exchanges.
And that's not all, Jessica, because you can also get discounts on hardware wallets, sign-up bonuses for some of the top exchanges, and trading fee discounts of up to 60%.
Amazing, Guy. Where can people find this deals page?
Well, just head on over to coinbureau.com/deals or use the link in the description.
So you've mentioned that stablecoins on Solana, and that being a really good example. If we kind of look back a little bit at the history of crypto and adoption, we had in 2020 it was like the DeFi summer. That was the big old trend, and then 2021 it was NFTs. Let's talk about it. 2022, like you could kind of say it was the layer two summer too. If we look now to 2024, do you have any predictions for what you're expecting to be as some of the the key trends within the whole industry, and then maybe how Solana is going to cater to that?
Yeah, there's this thing that happens in the blockchain industry, which I think is pretty unfortunate, where we sort of lurch from narrative to narrative, and that new narrative raises a bunch of money, and then it kind of never goes anywhere, right? And, I think you saw this with NFT marketplaces, right? OpenSea, is unfortunately not having a good time of it now. But like things move faster than product market fit, and by the time people find there isn't necessarily product market fit, they've moved on to the next thing. I think layer twos are kind of in the middle of that right now, where no one really wants to use a layer two. They much prefer to trade on a layer one, and if they're using a layer two, it's for a limited application. And the promises of that sort of scaling just seem like they're not what was promised in the early days. I think if you look forward into 2024, Hopefully, we're going to see in the United States more stablecoin legislation come through that makes it, sets up aside a clear framework for payment stablecoins. That legislation was sort of pending before the recess in the summer in the Senate and the House, and I hope it gets picked up again. Because that could be a really big unlock for merchants as well as, banks and anyone who's trying to transact and send money, whether domestically or abroad, instantly for 0.00025 cents of transaction fee. That's a pretty compelling vision there. I think the other piece that we'll see a lot of over the course of the next, let's call it 12 months, is consumer-facing applications launch. I think for years, it's sort of felt like, oh, next year is the year crypto goes mainstream. But I think we're going to see a lot of crypto applications go mainstream in ways that folks don't even realize they're built on blockchain yet.
Can you give us an example of, if kind of me as a consumer, what something might look like where I don't actually see the crypto interface?
Yeah, so Sling is a great example of this. Sling is sort of like an on-chain Venmo, and Sling supports 30 different countries and a whole number of different currencies, and you can move money around very easily, and they also have a bunch of off-ramping relationships, so you can actually, if you're in the United States, you can send money to someone and they can receive Swiss francs, or they can get Singaporean dollars, right? And they can do that for a much, much, much lower transfer fee than going through something like TransferWise or Western Union or a bank. And so I think those are really, really strong use cases for crypto. Apart from that, though, also decentralized social media is starting to be something that I think is getting more attractive to folks. There's a few networks on Solana that have been built out that are starting to attract a lot of users. And in this sort of federated world of social media that we might start to see, I think there's a lot of cool applications for folks being able to own data, better control where that data flows, and blockchain is really built for these types of things. So I think we'll see a lot of that as well. The last one I would say is the rise of decentralized physical infrastructure networks, which is not a particularly consumer-friendly terminology. But you look at something like Hivemapper, and Hivemapper is Google Street View, but it's built by thousands of dash cams in people's cars all around the country. And you can get one of these, you can plug it in, you can, earn tokens for basically mapping routes. And those are really interesting applications because Hivemapper can actually deliver a better quality of data than Google Street View can, right? Because the cars drive much more frequently than the Google Street View cars drive. And so those types of applications, I think, are going to start really showing people why something like a blockchain-based system can not only be cheaper, it can actually be better than a centralized system, which is counterintuitive. I think most people assume that centralized systems will always be cheaper and always be better.
The last example that you've given is quite an interesting one, because if you look at Uber, for example, Uber is this kind of like sharing economy.
Yeah.
The initial drivers were never incentivized to get on board and start, spreading the message. And whereas with something like this, it sounds like actually you get incentivized from the get-go. And what better way to onboard people into the decentralized cryptocurrency blockchain ecosystem than incentivization? You think that's like kind of like the secret sauce for us as consumers?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, when you look at something like Uber or Waze or Lyft, drivers got nothing when those companies went public or got acquired, right? And that is a shame, because as much as they were built by a bunch of folks in Silicon Valley, they were really built by a network of drivers as well, right? It's pretty hard to argue that a software engineer deserves, a huge equity grant, but the actual drivers who believed in Uber in the early days don't. And, if they'd gotten $1,000 of equity a year in the early days, that might have been a down payment for a house. That might have even been a whole house, depending on how early they were a driver, right? And this is kind of one of the problems with value capture systems today, is that we have built systems that require a large number of shareholders to make them work, like a ride-sharing network, like a social media network. But the benefits are deeply, deeply disproportionately held just to shareholders. And so I think there's a vision where you can use blockchain systems that actually make more fair networks, that these things are in some ways thought of almost as one giant digital cooperative, right? As more so than, anything else. That's probably the best analogy. I think there's a lot of folks who are maybe been skeptical of blockchain because they thought it was too good to be true. That's something I've definitely heard from some of my more left-leaning friends, is like, oh, but there must be a greedy capitalist thing somewhere going on. And it's like, sure, but the benefits are shared among the people who actually use the network because that's the owners. And I think there's a really compelling vision there about how this technology can fix some of our antitrust problems in this country.
Yeah. Out of interest, when did you first hear the term crypto and blockchain? Because you're extremely passionate about it, and it really does shine through. So I'm just curious what your eureka moment was.
So I think I first bought some Bitcoin in like 2011 or 2012, and it got lost on the Mt. Gox hack, right? And, at that point, I wasn't thinking about this stuff as like something that was really interesting from like a philosophical standpoint. It was just like, oh, this thing might go up. It sounds interesting. But then back in early 2017, I was working for a fintech company that was starting to try and build something on what we would now call DeFi. They were building a borrow lend token. But back then, it was just an Ethereum smart contract. And that was the moment where I sort of had to sit down and learn this stuff for work and sort of see, oh, this technology can make not only a much more efficient world, but a fairer and a more, a world that has better economic distribution, a world that is more fair, a world that really can benefit a much broader set of people. And that's still the reason I'm in this industry today. I think one of the biggest mistakes people make is they get into blockchain to make money. So if you want to make money, go work for one of the big financial institutions. If you want to actually like potentially change the way these systems work, blockchain is an incredibly great place to do that.
Absolutely. And very inspiring that it's kind of in 3 years, your journey with Solana has just exploded. For anyone that's watching, sitting on the sidelines going, oh, it might be a little bit too late for me to start working and building.
Oh, yeah.
It's never too late, guys, never too late. So I do want to touch now on the FTX issue that we saw last year and what could have happened, the impact it could have had to the Solana network. You've had a few talks. I saw your talk at Consensus, and you kind of share some Masari data that tells us about the Solana recovery post FTX. What is the on-chain metrics really saying about what we've seen and the year on since then?
Yeah, I think if you talked to me a year ago and said, oh, within 9 months, everything will be back to the way it was before, I would not have believed you. I would have thought you were being overly optimistic. But the truth of it is that this network has come through this storm incredibly strong. There were, at the foundation, we had no attrition. At Solana Labs, there was no attrition. Almost every team decided to stick through it to keep building on Solana because they saw the vision of this network and thought, we really can't build what we're trying to build on any other network. It requires the performance characteristics of Solana. And that strength of community is what got the network through this. I think there's very few networks that would have been able to go through something like the collapse of FTX and make it out the other side. And, we have to remember, Terra collapsed just that year, right? We'd seen a blockchain go from $52 billion to zero and not recover, right? Terra is gone at this point. This is somewhat similar to Ethereum's $80 ETH moment, right? Like there are these crucible moments for all of the really successful blockchain networks where it galvanizes the community together to say we're going to keep building. And so when you look at the on-chain metrics, for Solana, I think you'll see that the active addresses are still high. TVL is still going well. Solana DeFi volume is really high. New users are coming to the network. And, at the same time, really cool stuff is getting built and shipped. Breakpoint this year had over 40 announcements of new things shipping. That was incredibly cool to see. And folks really, we always say like, oh, the bear market's great for building, which is true, but a lot of people don't actually build through the bear market. They just sort of mope their way through the bear market. And the builders on Solana, they just continued building. And that's what we've really seen over these last maybe 6 months is that the stuff they're building has started shipping, and it's incredible.
And people are starting to pay attention as well. So I have some price predictions here that I'm gonna read to you, and I'd like to get your reaction. So we have here some bullish testaments from the likes of Vanek and Raul Pal. I spoke to Raul a few weeks ago on Coinbureau Clips. So Vanek is predicting that Solana could reach $3,211 by 2030. Raul Pal also very bullish on Solana, predicting $500 to $1,000 per sol. What is your take when you hear these price predictions? Vanek's prediction would mark a 10,600% price surge from maybe not today's price because things are looking pretty green today, but from around a kind of a $35 per Solana. So what's your take when you hear these?
Yeah, I mean, price predictions are always a little bit of tea leaf reading and, voodoo dolls and Russian roulette. But I think really, if you read between the lines in all of those reports, what they're saying is that Solana is going to be around for the long term. And I don't think that's a bet that you can necessarily make on a lot of networks and a lot of architectures today. I think we can be pretty sure Ethereum's going to be around. We can be pretty sure Bitcoin's going to be around. And we can be pretty sure Solana's going to be around as well. And it's really, it's incredibly humbling to have the network that we've been working on for, all these years. And, especially the engineers who, started on the project in 2018, right? Like then spent 2.5 years building in private before the network even launched, like way before I joined. To have Solana sort of be in that the third, right after you got Bitcoin, you got Ethereum, you got Solana. Like that is an incredible milestone just to have there. I can't say anything specific on price predictions. The lawyers won't would not be happy on that. But I think the
Yeah.
real thing there is really it's a testament that Solana is going to continue to exist, and the technology is going to be something folks are excited about years into the future, regardless of what that means for any price.
And when it comes to scalability now, looking ahead, I'd love to get the strategy from head of strategy when it comes to ensuring that these kind of long-term scalability and security questions around the network are really stronger than ever. We did see a few outages with Solana recently. So what is kind of some of the things that are in place, maybe some of the conversations that we had at the annual conference?
Yeah, I'll say scalability is not really one that there's ever been any concerns about for Solana. The network is built to be quite performant and quite scalable. And part of this is because Solana's scaling is based on improvements in hardware, right? And I think we underestimate how much hardware changes on a 10-year time horizon. That's, several orders of magnitude improvement if you're just following Moore's law. And this is something we've seen since the 60s, is that the only bad bet to make is that hardware is not going to get faster and cheaper, right? And so this means a few things going forwards. This either means the capacity of the Solana network keeps increasing. And that's, projects like Firedance are squeezing 10 to 100x more performance out of the identical hardware the network is running on today, which is incredible to see. It also means that, we can keep the network actually cheaper to run in terms of a validator if you start to see, really even higher performance you can squeeze out of the same hardware as before. So from a scalability perspective, I think that vision of Solana being one global state machine, synchronized as close to the speed of light as possible, that's the goal here, right? And so, increasing throughput, decreasing latency, pushing the number of transactions per second even higher. There's some technologies shipped over the last 18 months, like local fee markets and Quick, that have really improved some of the reliability of the network, but also just small incremental updates and bug fixes over the last 2 years have really put the network on 116, which is the version it's running now. It's in a great place. It's the fastest, snappiest Solana there's ever been. And it's really cool to see all of these sort of improvements compounding. And looking forward, this is where you start to see really exciting new features coming for the network, whether this is some zero-knowledge system calls being integrated into the base layer for, zero-knowledge programs to run natively on Solana, or whether it's the runtime v2 updates that are going to be coming in probably about a year or so that add a bunch of new features, to the rollout of Token 2022, which is this new token program standard for the network that includes things like confidential transfers and a lot of the tools that something like a tokenized fund would need to build on the Solana mainnet. So there's a lot of just like incredible work that's been done over the last 2 years. It's far too much to sort of enumerate. But it really is that culmination of a ton of different work that has made the Solana network what it is today.
Interesting. And final question, because I know that you are pressed for time and really appreciate you taking the time out. Just from speaking to you, it seems like there is a really clear goal, even with listing off some of the things that you can expect to see from Solana. It's kind of the core, it always goes back to it being faster, as cheap as possible, and scalable. And that is kind of the underlying thing. I looked into, so Anatoly has a background building cell phone networks. Is that correct?
Yeah, embedded systems and cell phones at Qualcomm.
And you kind of get that recurring theme then, that it kind of makes sense why Solana has this underlying kind of very core, clear focus. Would you say that's one of the kind of secret sources to Solana's very clear objectives and goals, and ticking those off the list?
Yeah, a whole bunch of the founding engineering team and some of the other co-founders came out of Qualcomm. And it just brings a different ethos. I think, if you really want to go deep on this, we did an episode on Validated with Kevin Bowers where we go into all of the sort of minutia here of this. But, modern software engineering has sort of forgotten that you have to run on hardware. And this is sort of a real problem with cloud architecture. This is a real problem with a lot of modern systems, is that they're not built to be performant. They're built for this sort of abstract concept of web scalability, where nothing really needs to happen quickly. You can always just throw more servers at the problem. That is not the case with mobile phones and mobile phone networks. Like your iPhone, it's got a battery. It's got a certain size. It can't just produce a ton of heat and you put a giant cooling tower on it. And so getting as much performance as possible, especially out of the early days of flip phones, that was a requirement to make these things actually work and make them something consumers would want to see. And that ethos of sort of radical practicality, of going as close to the hardware as you can when you're building stuff, that is the core DNA of these low-level folks who operate on the Solana network. And it's one of the superpowers of the network, I think, is that there's this ruthless practicality. And it does have this sort of love of embedded systems. And, this is why the first validator client was built in Rust, right? It's an embedded engineers love Rust, and C is the same thing, right? And so you just see a lot of different decisions made in how to build the Solana network because of, in part, this sort of embedded systems background that a lot of the folks who were involved in the early days had.
What a great note to end on. Austin, thank you so
Yeah.
much for taking the time out. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure that our viewers got a great amount of value from it as well. So thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Fantastic. Well, Austin, thank you so much for taking the time out today. I'm sure that our viewers got a lot of value from it. And for everyone watching, thank you for sticking around. We really hope you enjoyed the interview and found some of it useful. I will leave the links to Austin's socials in the description below. And also, if you are looking for any deals on hardware wallets or some discounts on some of the top exchanges, you can check out our deals page. That will also be in the description below. Thank you so much for watching, and see you all next time.